This is a data privacy detective. Skimming. Really e-skimming. That's what we're going to talk about in this podcast. E-skimming at ATM machines, stores, fuel pumps, restaurants, bars, the use of a credit card or a debit card or a benefit card, where we end up losing money to thieves who install e-skimming devices where cards are read. Now, May 22, 2024, a very important article in the New York Times about how a woman fell victim to use of her food stamp benefit card out in California and lost. She'd saved up to be able to buy food and diapers for her grandchild and so on. And suddenly she had $6 left in her account. How did this happen? Fascinating story. Good journalism by the New York Times. But this is all because of skimming off a food stamp benefit card. Now, food stamp benefit card isn't quite like your modern debit card or credit card because it uses that magnetic strip that we all became familiar with when credit cards came out. And what happens is a skimmer uses a device at a store, let's say a grocery store, if they're focused on food stamps, and installs a skimmer into the store device, which then reads the magnetic strip. And that gives it all sorts of information about the benefit number of the individual. And then it may have a camera, other device attached, often not needed, so that when the person puts in the PIN number, the PIN, that is read, and then the thief collects that and thousands or millions of other food stamp users, and either directly or sells this on the dark web. And people can then go out and they'll have the PIN number and the card number, and they can use it to acquire all sorts of things through food stamp benefits. Now, the use of these electric benefit cards, the EBTs, sometimes they're called, electronic benefit transfer cards, EBT cards, is that they don't have chips, typically, although a couple of states, California and Oklahoma, are hoping to roll out the summer of 2024 chip EBT cards. That's going to help. But with this, really, these benefits are at stake, and federal law, which is going to expire in a few months unless Congress does something about this, is going to limit any recovery that people who are on food stamps and use these benefits to 2 months of recovery. And so the woman I described is out a lot of money that she had saved to keep eating well and living decently in society. But the skimming problem is far beyond these benefit cards, because they can be beefed up, and government ought to get to it and do that, because they're used all sorts of places: ATM machines, fuel pumps, stores, taxis, bars, restaurants. We all use credit cards. It's so many places. Online purchasing on our home PC. And now home PC is a little hard for somebody to break in and put a skimmer there. But everything else is such that thieves can put a skimmer onto an ATM machine, a tiny camera that can read your PIN number when you put it in, a device within the card reader that's part of an ATM to get the information needed about the card number. All sorts of ways that skimming devices are being put into stores, taxis, bars, everywhere we use it. At restaurants, a good example. And we hand our card off to someone, they take it, and we don't really know what they do with it for a minute or two, and they come back, and there could be a skimmer, or the waiter could be in on the scam. This is what's jeopardized in our current modern system. I mean, I've traveled internationally recently, and cash, people don't take cash anymore. Everything's on a card. Well, you got to be careful then, ever more so, of what you do with that card. And so that's what we're going to talk about. So what can we as individuals do to minimize these losses to ourselves and a society. Because let's face it, when a financial institution or government incurs a loss, and so it isn't ours to the full extent, we all still lose. The price of doing business goes up, and of course, we all as consumers end up paying, right? And individually, as in the case of the food stamps, people can be out a lot of very precious money. Or if you use your debit card in a bad way and don't report it and don't help at all, the thief could take your whole bank account. So there's a lot at stake here. So what can we do about it? Well, let's talk about it first with ATMs and fuel pumps. With an ATM, none of us are trained about spotting these skimmers, but inspect the ATM machine. It may be hard to see, but check if there's a little camera above the screen cover. There shouldn't be. Check to see if there's a second device of some kind next to the card reader. Often it's put above the card reader. It just looks like an extra thing, but if it's sticking out, separated from the screen cover, that is not normal. And you shouldn't use that ATM machine. You ought to go into the bank or wherever it is and tell them they've got a skimmer going on, and they can be in trouble themselves if they don't get rid of it right away and report it to the authorities. Avoid the use of ATMs in tourist areas where often we need $50, $100 for whatever the reason. Better to go inside of a bank, a financial institution, where it's more likely they'll be policing whether skimmers, which, by the way, it can just take a few seconds to install. That's not the problem, and it can be done in the dead of night, and nobody notices it for days, and that's what happens. Use cards with a chip technology in them rather than the magnetic strip. If you have magnetic strip credit cards, update them. Go to your vendor, whoever it is, and say, why aren't you giving me a chip card? And if they're not, consider a new vendor for that. Don't use a debit card for linked accounts because the laws about credit card losses and bank charges and other thefts are different. Use a credit card for instead of a debit card often if you're using it. Now, an ATM machine, debit card, you may want to restrict your use of a debit card on your bank account only to ATM withdrawals. At least then you're not using them for online payments and other things. Well, that's for ATM machines. Fuel or electric pumps. The FBI has given us guidance about this. So here are a couple of simple thoughts. If you can, use the pump that's closest to the store or the cashier, with the idea being a thief would rather put a skimmer on a faraway pump because nobody will notice. Not perfect advice, but good advice. Secondly, pay inside. I know you got to go inside and stand in line for a minute till somebody buys some milk, but pay inside. More likely that an inside behind the counter device is not going to be subject to a skimming device. Number 3, and this is for anybody, when you're inserting your PIN, put your other hand, the one that's not putting in the PIN, over the PIN, your hand that's putting in the PIN. At least that makes it, we hope, invisible to cameras that may be collecting your PIN information. Because without that, it's hard to use a credit card. So it won't be perfect because there are skimming devices now that can read from your touch. I don't know what you do about that, except, again, go back to tapping rather than inserting your card. So that's for a fuel pump. Now, I'm going to give you 16 other points that will apply to any use of a benefit card, a credit card, a debit card when you're using it. Okay, so let's go through them. Number 1, I've touched on this already. Cover the visibility of your hand that's putting in your PIN. Not hard to do, and you're gonna minimize your risk that somebody's going to steal your PIN. Number 2, report any suspicious transaction or payment you notice. You should be reviewing your credit card and other information regularly, your banking account information regularly, but you've got to report that immediately, or you can lose rights you have, and you may be able to prevent the real invasion of your assets. Number 3, don't ever, if you can, release your card to another person. Now, in a restaurant, somebody say, I'm sorry, but I've got to walk over there. I know, sounds absurd. Walk over with the person. Even then, you won't know. But at least you're preventing what happens in persons who have your card, even if they don't know what's happening to them, being skimmed, or if they're in on the scam, collecting your personal information. Number 4, have virus protection on your personal computer. Enough said about that. Number 5, don't keep your PIN information with or on the card. And think for a minute. Most financial institutions have now changed so the CVG, the security card, is not on the front of the card. It's on the back of the card. You see, and how that prevents skimming as well, because both essential items are not on the card. And if you're tapping the card, that's going to, again, try to screen it with your other hand if you can. That's about as good as you can do as an individual to protect yourself against a skimming device you're not aware of. Number 6, don't post information about your cards and information online. Now, a lot of us do that. It's convenient. I know that. But if you want to minimize your risk, because almost anybody can be hacked, you're going to increase your risk the more you give out your important information, including your security codes or any PIN number with online transactions. Just avoid it. Number 7, dedicate one card, ideally a credit card, for online purchases without linking, you see, to your bank account. Now, you may say, well, I use PayPal, so I don't have to worry about that. Well, you still have to worry about it because your PayPal information, nothing's perfect. But think about using only one card for online purchases with a relatively low credit limit, and that at least has minimize the loss you could incur if somebody misuses it and gets away with it. Number 8, activate transaction alerts and then respond to them immediately. That's pretty basic, isn't it? I know we don't want to be bothered by them, but we need to be, because it's really the institutions that have their inbuilt ways of figuring out whether a transaction is suspicious. Number 9, so many times said, use a strong password or a password manager. There are reasons for this. I think we all are beginning to understand this. And then change them periodically, especially for important cards, credit cards, debit cards, and so on. Number 10, use a VPN if you're going to use your PC and travel at public Wi-Fi places. Even if it's a coffee shop or certainly a hotel when you're out of town, because those become public Wi-Fi susceptible, and a VPN will help prevent invasion of your information when you're online. Number 11, when you're buying from some new online site, just a friend told you about, oh, you ought to go shop for your whatever here, and take a look. It's really great stuff. Be very cautious about that. And make sure that it has HTTPS security at a minimum built into it, and then be very cautious about allowing any of them to collect and use all of your key information. Number 12, consider virtual cards, which are certainly on the rise, and they limit, obviously, the amount at stake at any one time. Number 13, review your accounts for odd charges. Now, especially small ones. Let me tell you, I was out of the country recently. I went to an ATM machine I thought would be safe. It was inside the hotel. It wasn't at some tourist site. Oh, I guess hotels are tourist sites. Dumb me. Anyway, there was a skimming device there. They tried to take $1 or €1, a little bit more than €1 out of it. What were they doing? They were testing if they could get in. My bank and Visa card connection immediately caught it and said, hey, are you doing this? And, they caught the skimming. How would I know other than getting really better at it? We all have to work together in this, but it's a good example of how, especially you get some small amount, don't just say, I'm not going to worry about it. That is suspicious, and it could lead then to the next time they take out thousands of dollars, you see. Number 14, use tapping your card. I've said this before, I'm going to reemphasize it. Instead of inserting your card, and shade your tapping if you can do that. Tapping is on the increase for obvious security reasons. I think we've talked about. Number 15, I'm going to say it again, change your PIN regularly, not just your credit card number. Credit card numbers get very cumbersome to change, but PIN numbers and things like that are much easier to change. And finally, number 16, don't use a debit card for online sales, because that gives access to your bank account. And, you get one theft and it could wipe out your bank account. And now you've got the bank and yourself both arguing about how much you might get reimbursed, because it's not a credit card transaction necessarily. So there's 16 points for all of us. Now, one final point. Skimming is getting more and more sophisticated. It's kind of like an arms race, the thieves improve how clever they are and their devices, and institutions and all of us get a little smarter about catching up, and off we go on this theft race, really is what it is. We're defending and the thieves are on the offense. And skimming devices today can be internal to a vendor's device, as I've mentioned, that no individual can ever be expected to see or test or prevent, even for PINs. So the responsibility is ultimately on the IT infrastructure. And so it's on vendors and financial institutions and state and federal government with relation to food stamps and other benefits. It's not enough to say, here's a card, it's your problem now. Nobody can say that. There's a lot at stake here, and the infrastructure ultimately has to defend as best it can against always increasing cleverness on the part of thieves, because they're going to go where the money is, and there's a lot of money at stake here. The FBI's estimate is $1 billion in 2024 is probably how much is being taken from e-skimming. And that number is only going to go up, it seems. One last bit of good news. On April 1st, 2024, a federal judge convicted an ATM skimmer, a gang ringleader, and sentenced him to 75 months in prison. It's about time. A lot of the ultimate ringleaders are outside the United States, or they're outside of Europe. They may be in countries where there's no extradition treaty, but at least the governments around the world are getting more and more serious about criminal convictions for thieves. And maybe there's some hope someday that regardless of all the politics of international matters, every government ought to say, look, we're not here to enrich theft gangs. And if we could get governments to cohere with industry and all of us as individuals, we can limit the theft by e-skimming and protect all of us. Well, with that, I'll conclude, as I always do, by reminding us protecting your personal privacy and identity begins with you.